Okay, so the Noxious Weeds Act is a piece of legislation in Manitoba. It's one of the oldest pieces of legislation in Manitoba. It actually was basically started when the province started way back in the day. There's always been legislation on the books with the intent to protect farmland from noxious weeds. So there was a major change to it quite a number of years ago now. I think everybody should be familiar with that by now, but basically by 2017, 2018, it was fully revamped. And we now have a system in the Noxious Weeds Act that has different tiers of weeds rather than one big list of weeds that's on a Noxious Weeds Act that you have to control. Now there's different tiers of weeds and there's different levels of what you have to do to control or destroy those weeds depending where they sit on in those tiers. So this is just an example of the Noxious Weeds Act. This is where you could find it. So you just have to Google it. But always when you're looking for an act, always look for the corresponding regulations as well, because there's quite a bit of information in the regulations that go along with that act. With this particular act, there is only one regulation. With other acts, sometimes there's several, or in some cases, maybe lots of them. But in this case, we have one act, the Noxious Weeds Act. We have the Noxious Weeds regulation that goes with it. And the list of the weeds is actually in that regulation, the list of the tiers in the weeds. So basically, the responsibilities under the Act, and I'm just going to show you a couple of pieces in the Act that are the most relevant today. So there is a responsibility of all landowners or all people in charge of land to destroy or control noxious weeds. And so under Section 3.1, you must destroy all Tier 1 noxious weeds that are on land that a person owns or occupies. If they're Tier 2 weed, then it must destroy those weeds if the area colonized by those weeds is less than 20 acres. And if it's more than 20 acres, then the wording goes to control all Tier 2 noxious weeds if they are over 20 acres or more. And then for the list of Tier 3 weeds, the wording in the Act is that it's a control those Tier 3 weeds on land that a person owns or occupies if the weeds' uncontrolled growth or spread is likely to negatively affect an aspect of Manitoba's economy or environment in the area of the land or the well-being of residents in proximity to that land. So most of our agricultural weeds are in our Tier 3 category. They're weeds that are out there, they're on the land, and basically we want to control them because we don't want them getting any worse or affecting any land around or affecting any people around. The really bad weeds are the ones that are the Tier 1s and then to a lesser extent the Tier 2s. These are the weeds that we don't want on our land because they can be very, very troublesome. So normally up until now, up until recently, Waterhemp and things like Palmer amaranth and smooth pigweed, there's actually been 3 pigweed species that are Tier 1 weeds. Most of the rest of our Tier 1 weeds, and again, you can look at the list, it's all online. Most of our Tier 1 weeds are not cropland weeds. They're weeds that are in ditches, they're weeds that are in pastures, or they would infest like wildlife management areas or treat areas. So they're really not something that we need to worry about on farmland, except for these 3 amaranth species or these 3 pigweed species. So up until now, they have all been Tier 1 weeds, but we are now with Waterhemp, because it has been confirmed in 28 RMs in Manitoba as of 2024. It's rapidly spreading. It's been downgraded to a Tier 2 weed in those RMs. So as a Tier 2 weed, we still must destroy those small infestations so that weed cannot be allowed to stay. So if it gets beyond, because we know there's an awful lot that they're coming in loaded with resistance already. We know that glyphosate's not working. Lots of group 2s don't work. Our group 14s may not be working. Group 5s may not work. And we know we have some group 4 resistance showing up as well. So we're wondering if our dicamba, fluroxypyr, some of our other group 4s, whether they're still working on all of the water hemp that we're finding. So with that, we know by the time the weeds show up, they're too big to spray again, or whatever we've got isn't going to kill them anyway. So we need to be hand weeding them, or we end up mowing down the weeds and the crop all around where those weeds are. So again, a small infestation as a Tier 2 weed still must be destroyed, but larger field-wide infestations must be controlled. So the wording is different. You do not have to go destroy that weed and that crop all around it, but you need to control it so that it doesn't spread. So it will remain a Tier 1 in the RMs where it has yet to be found, and we will be monitoring this situation year by year and seeing how fast this weed is moving and where it's moving to, because it moves very quickly and it infests fields very quickly, and it really doesn't fit the definition of a Tier 1 weed. Tier 1 weeds, by definition, are weeds that are rare or not yet present in Manitoba, or they're present in very isolated areas and not not moving around, they're not increasing. And water hemp is really not like that anymore, especially in the RMs where it's been found. So this is the most current map of Manitoba. Anything in red has had at least one confirmation of water hemp confirmed by DNA analysis. The weeds are, the Pamarant species are difficult to tell apart, especially when they're small. So we have in the past been utilizing a lab in Winnipeg that does DNA testing to know exactly which species it is. Now that we're changing labs going forward, I'm just in the process of working that out. But anybody who wants to get some stuff, any plants tested, please call me and we'll work it out. We have another lab in Winnipeg that we're going to be working through. I'm just dealing, sorting out the actual details of that now because we have switched the labs that we are going to be sending our samples through for species confirmation. So this is the map. So any of those 28 RMs now that are red on this map, water hemp as of now is moved down to a tier 2 weed. And for the rest of the province that is not red on the map, it is still a tier 1 weed, which means it must be destroyed when found. So just a couple pictures here just to remind you of what water hemp looks like. It is a pigweed. It does look like a pigweed, but it's going to be, sometimes the leaves are a bit longer and skinnier than a regular red root pigweed. It can be kind of a darker, shiny green leaf, not all the time, but lots of times it does have a different look to it that way. And the stems and the leaves and the petioles, so the main stem on the plant, and then the petioles, which are the stems that attach the leaf to the stem, to the main stem, those are very, very smooth. They have no hairs on them, and they're not rough and bumpy feeling like you'd feel on red root pigweed. There are other pigweeds that are smooth as well, but that is a dead giveaway, basically to know that we're not dealing with red root pigweed, and it very could well be one of the really bad pigweeds. There are other pigweeds that aren't nearly so troublesome, but we do need to make sure that we're not dealing with red root pigweed and then from there find out which other pigweed it is. So here's one picture for you. Sometimes when you look at these weeds from the top down, they kind of look a bit poinsettia-like. And in here in this picture with these two in this pot, you can see particularly the one over here on the right-hand side. These are really long, skinny leaves. They're a little bit darker green, and they really have quite a shine to them, which you can really pick that out when you're, when you're looking at them in a certain light. And then I want to focus on these little weeds down here. And so my next picture, my final picture, these are some baby water hemps coming up. They do have a bit of a different cotyledon than a regular red root pigweed. It is a little bit kind of shorter and fatter. This is kind of a good a good picture here. These are all new water hemps coming up, and the cotyledons are the seed leaves as they come up. Excuse me, sorry. Are a little bit wider. They taper a bit more to the tip here. Whereas other pigweeds, the cotyledons tend to be kind of long and narrow, very much like a cigar shape. So it is very difficult to tell what it is, what these weeds are when they're small, but we have to start to get good at this and know what we're looking at. Especially, we could very well be looking at mixed populations of several different pigweeds. For sure, we have red root pigweed and water hemp occurring, in the same areas and in the same fields. So we need to know what we're dealing with at this stage on these bigger weeds in these pots. These might be still controllable. We really need to be controlling water hemp before it's 4 inches tall. If I'll just go back up to the picture before, or even this picture, I think is better. You can see there's an awful lot of growing points on here. And the more growing points these weeds have, the harder they are to kill, particularly if we're going after them with a contact herbicide. But basically, you need to be trying to control water hemp before it's 4 inches tall, and you need to be using the most appropriate product you can use. We're going to assume that glyphosate isn't working, our group 2s aren't working, our group 14s may not be working, and now we're starting to see some misses with our group 4s as well. So this is something that we really have to be on top of. So going forward, again, send me any pictures you have. I'll come and take a look at fields when I can. I'd like to get out as much as I can to take a look at things, and especially if we have an opportunity to still get some product on here that might take out some of these weeds so that we're not dealing with them going to seed and increasing the weed seed bank for water hemp in our fields. So that's all I have on that. If anybody has any questions, let me know. And I think, Lionel, you've got our phone numbers and our emails and things. And please, anybody has any questions, contact me, send me pictures, send me, email or text me pictures, or give me a call if you've got any questions at all about water hemp.
Okay, Kim, one question did come
Mhm.
in. The two RMs that look like two RMs that are isolated to the north and the west,
Mhm.
is there any explanation as to how Waterhemp got there
Yeah.
are um, just seems odd that they're kind of out in from
Yeah.
that kind of solid area.
Yeah. 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 So you're talking the Dauphin RM and over here in Ellis Archie. As far as I know, Ellis Archie's only ever had one plant found, and it was a very sharp-eyed farmer a few years ago found it when he was out swathing his canola and realized that there was a weed that was very, very tall above the canola, stopped, pulled the weed, we got it checked, and it was water hemp. We don't know how it got there. As far as I know, there hasn't been any more found since. Pulled it out before it set seed, but they can move any number of ways, and particularly they'll move. It could be in equipment, in dirt on equipment. These are tiny, tiny little. Well, they're a pigweed seed. So if you know what red root pigweed looks like, it's a tiny little black seed. It's about the size of a flake of pepper. They're tiny and they can move in equipment, in dirt on equipment, or just, hiding out in any nooks and crannies in any equipment. They can move in the digestive tract of birds and they can move very long distances that way. The birds basically are eating the weed seeds down south and depositing them as they fly north. And they can also move in floodwaters. So we do know over here on the eastern side of the province that a lot of the initial infestations were probably coming up the Red River because, weed has been a problem down in the States for many, many years. And we know it came up, and then as that Red River flooded and those weeds got deposited onto land, and then it starts getting moved around because the weeds weren't being controlled, or they weren't even probably being noticed at first. It was just a few here and there, but they are prolific seed producers. So the problem is even one or two plants that get away on you can really cause a problem. If you even start with a few plants on a field and do absolutely nothing, within 3 years to 4 years, you can have that weed. Like it'll be solid field, side to side. It'll be corner to corner on that field. This up in Dauphin, we're not sure where that came from. It showed up a couple times there on just one particular farm. The individual there had bought equipment down in the States, but not for a number of years. So it may have come up on some equipment that was bought from down in the States a number of years ago. There's just maybe been a few plants surviving here and there. On that particular farm, it seems to show up every time that farmer grows Clearfield canola. There are some great Clearfield canola varieties out there, but the products you use in crop for post-emergent spray in a Clearfield canola is a group 2. So you're not going to get weeds with that spray. You're not going to be able to kill them if they're group 2 resistant, and we know that water hemp pretty much in Manitoba is all a group 2 resistant. It comes up here already resistant. So that weed has showed up a few times over the years in the fields where the Clearfield canola has been grown, and it's just a few plants here and there. They're hand-picked. They don't go to seed, but it shows up somehow. So again, we'll never really know absolutely for sure where it comes from or how it gets there. In most cases, we just don't know. It just starts showing up, and then there's just a few plants here and there. So I'm not nearly as concerned about those two outliers as I would be over here, where it's really moving from field to field, and there's some really major infestations. But the fact is, it could show up absolutely anywhere. And if you look at the map of the United States of North Dakota, it's basically at the entire border of Manitoba and into Saskatchewan. So any of these RMs down here are very vulnerable to it moving north somehow in through again equipment, dirt transfer, anything coming in equipment, any waters flowing north, and of course wildlife, birds and other wildlife as well. So it could show up anywhere, and we may never know exactly how it gets there or how it got there.
Okay, and being that this is in the act, who's responsible for, I guess, keeping or doing the job of controlling this or enforcing it?
Well, the job of the weed control responsibility is whoever owns or occupies the land. So, and everyone is responsible, including the Crown. So that includes government land, that's basically all land in the province is covered by the Act. The Act itself is enforced at the municipal level. So some of the RMs in Manitoba actually have formed a district, a weed control district, and they have a board, and they'll actually hire somebody called a weed supervisor, and they will actually have a spray program, a mowing program, and they have a program to enforce the Noxious Weeds Act. If an RM doesn't do that by law, they still have to enforce the Act, but they do it a slightly different way. And by law, they must appoint a person or several, it can be more than one person, and that person's called a weeds inspector, just a little bit of a different title, but exactly the same duties under the Act. The RMs have the responsibility to enforce the Act. So if a farmer has got weeds in the act, like as tier ones, tier twos, tier threes, on land, and they need to be controlled or destroyed. And the farmer's not doing that. The farmer may not be aware, or he may not want to do it. He or she may not want to be doing anything about it. The RM is responsible for making sure that that act is enforced. And so that is all RMs have the responsibility of enforcing that act on all land in Manitoba, including Crown. The Crown is bound by the act as well. So that includes government land.